For player profiles, in-depth features, and exclusive interviews, visit sfhandbook.com to learn more about the best young football players in the world. Hello, welcome back to the Scouted Football Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Donoghue, and this is yet another club-specific episode. Looking forward to delving into this one with a podcast debutant, but long-time supporter of the pod, as well as Scouted Football contributor John Mackenzie. Many of you will be familiar with John's work from Analytics FC, All Stats, Aren't We? And various other footballing and chess playing endeavours. John is a regular on the Scouted timeline with his hot takes on all things football and youth football and from a separate world, Leeds United. But John, very pleased to have you with us. How are we doing?
Yeah, doing really well. As you said, I've enjoyed this podcast for a long time, and it's great to be on it. So looking forward to chatting to you today.
Too kind. You're rubbing me up the right way there to begin with. But today's episode today's topic of discussion is SC Freiburg in Germany. Managed not to mention them in my opening gambit. It's all about the suspense on this podcast, as I'm sure you'll know. But why Freiburg then? Well, as it stands, they're third in the Bundesliga. Nosebleed territory for them, really. And they've conceded the fewest goals across the division with 9 in 11 games, which I found quite curious. And until just before the November international break, and conveniently just before we planned this episode, they were unbeaten in the league until Bayern ruined that streak like the ruthlessly efficient and overpowered buzzkill that they are. John, you've taken a keen interest in Freiburg, not only this season, but in years past. What is it about the club that makes them such an appealing watch, but also a side that you loosely follow or identify with?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In many respects, though, I never really intended to follow Freiburg, and it was only because I ended up going to watch a game of theirs in the Dreisamstadion, which was formerly known as the Schwarzwaldstadion, the Black Forest Stadium, the iconic stadium in the foothills of the Black Forest, that they actually started watching them. So for me, I'm very much a football watcher who enjoys smart football and well-run football clubs. But when it came to Freiburg, it was very much, I guess, a romantic sense of watching football. I had a great time in the city for a few days, and also really enjoyed the whole match-going experience as well. So I've been lucky enough in that they are actually quite a smart-run club as well. So it all worked out well for me, really. But yeah, it's been nice following them. I, in many respects, I am a bit of a Glory supporter because I started following in around 2018, and they'd come up from relegation in 2015, I think. So and they ended up in the Europa League shortly after that. And as you've said, they've never really looked back, and they are currently in nosebleed territory. So it's been a real pleasure following them in recent years.
You're going to be involved in a podcast which is steeped in culture when the word foothills is basically used in the introduction. That's just you know what you're in for there, don't you? Freiburg. I mean, it's, as you mentioned, the iconic Schwarzwald Stadium. It is a club which, as you say, you can attach a romantic element to it. I think the discourse around footballers and or how they all perform like robots. Maybe sometimes you could attribute that to certain clubs as well, but I don't think you could say Freiburg are one of those. Just going through sort of a brief history of the club, I was looking at sort of the managerial history, and in the era of chopping and changing managers at the first sign of trouble, 4 or 5 game run without a win, and people are starting to get itchy trigger fingers in the boardroom. It's quite interesting of the approach that Freiburg have taken over the past 20, 25 years when it comes to managers. And currently in the dugout at the moment, as I'm sure you'll enlighten us about, is Christian Streich, who is quite the character.
Yeah, really interesting guy. He turned up in 2011 as the head coach, but he's been around for 30 years. He's been working with the youth team. He was a player in Freiburg. He grew up in Freiburg. He famously turns up to the training ground on his bike. Is very much a sort of company man in that sense. Also, sort of to add to what we were saying before, yes, this is a smart club, but this is also a club which enables you to have romantic ideals about football. And Christian Streich is someone who has very outspoken views on a lot of what's going on in world football, and he will talk quite freely about his opinions on corruption in FIFA. He's talked recently about the Newcastle takeover. He's not one to mince his words, and yeah, it's just everything I think flows from that. The idea that you can have a long-term coach who turns up and allows you to have that long-term vision where you are able to implement the ideas that you want to freely without having to worry about maybe losing your job. And I think for me, everything sort of stems from that. They're able to do smart recruitment. They're able to absorb potential relegations and not worry too much about, again, as you said, managerial turnover. There is a plan here, and it works. It's like Norwich, but without necessarily bombing when they get into the top division. So yeah, it's very much down to Christian Streich, and I guess Volker Finke, the previous manager, who got them into the Bundesliga in '93 and was around for, again, I think 16 years in the end. But this sort of idea that they bring in a manager, he sticks around. They have a very clear idea of how the club is going to be run, and those managers buy into it, and the players buy into it, and as a result, Freiburg are able to be greater than the sum of their parts.
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned Finker there. He was around for 16 years, as you say, and Christian Streich. I mean, he might not reach that 16-year mark, but I tell you what, he's had a good innings so far, hasn't he? I mean, since 2011, as you say, a relegation, a promotion, and it's European football, and as you say, he's kind of stuck to the ideals which ultimately make him an iconic figure in German football. But onto this season, sort of 2021-22, that unbeaten run in the first 10 games of the season, that was, I mean, would you say that was quite surprising, or is that, was that something which you could have foreseen, given the fact that, as you say, they're an intelligently run club?
Yeah, I think it's definitely overperformance. So I'm not going to pretend that it wasn't. I think there's various factors playing into this, probably because, as you'll know, there's been a fair amount of managerial upheaval in the Bundesliga this season, and I think off the back of that, Freiburg have managed to enjoy some good results. So, for example, beating Dortmund 2-1 at home. I'm not going to say it was a smash and grab, because it wasn't, but it was. They definitely were favoured playing Dortmund a couple of games into the season when they were just still finding their feet under Marco Rose. And similarly, they managed to have good results against Leipzig as well, who, as you'll know as well, have struggled to sort of find their feet under Jesse Marsch as well. So I think partly that they've partly just kept scores low, scored low value chances in some games. So this is definitely not a representative run for them, and it will regress to a mean at some point. But equally, they are a team who approach things with a very sort of solid defensive base. They have some very exciting attacking players. They structure their team around their exciting attacking players, and so they are a team who set up to be absorb pressure and attack quickly and intelligently. And I guess the game that they did lose against Bayern Munich was interesting, because not only did they not get absolutely rolled over by Bayern Munich, as many Bundesliga clubs have done this season, but they took the game to Bayern in the first 20-25 minutes, pressed high, caused Bayern problems, and obviously did eventually succumb. And again, if you look at the underlying numbers, maybe we're a little bit lucky not to concede more, but they clearly are doing something which is above and beyond what a lot of other mid-table Bundesliga sides are doing. So I think it's a bit of a balance of both, a little bit of luck, but also, yeah, they are smart. They are a smart club. They bring in players on the cheap. They make those players better. They sell them on for money, and they make profit, which I think in any any top league in Europe is impressive to do. So it's nice to enjoy the top three status, and hopefully it will continue for a while longer. But yeah, this is very much, I think, to do with external factors as well as the internal factors of being a smartly run club.
Yeah, I mean, I can't lay claim to having seen every Freiburg game this season. I've only watched clips sort of in preparation for this, but they do seem very methodical. They do seem, workmanlike, but also, they do have those players who can change things. And while I will say that, they don't really have any. What would you wouldn't really say household names, but I suppose that is kind of the beauty of it, where that makes them greater than the sum of their parts, because they're all pulling in the same direction, because there's no ego, there's an acceptance that this is a collective unit, that we're only going to thrive if we're all pulling in the same direction, as I say. And we'll get on to sort of the history and the pathway of developing youth players, given that this is the Scouted podcast. But the individuals, there's one in particular who obviously stands out from a Scouted perspective, and that is Nico Schlotterbeck, who you kindly penned for us in the latest volume of the Scouted Football Handbook, Volume 12. On my sheet here, the first question I've got for you, John, is why is Nico so great?
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I think obviously when you're watching Freiburg, I think Schlotterbeck is someone who stands out. I should say Nico Schlotterbeck because his brother is there as well and does occasionally play. But what I think, stands out as particularly a ball playing centre back. We live in an age where the ability to have a good ball playing centre back is an asset for any football club, and he is particularly impressive at it. He is someone who gets the ball forward by carrying it a lot, and you'll often see him marauding forward towards the edge of the box. Freiburg's whole left side really is built up around their attacking. So they've got their more attacking players on that side, players like Christian Günther, the left back or left wing back, who recently debuted for Germany. They've also got Vincenzo Grifo as well over on that side. And I guess Nicolas Höfler, the centre midfielder, although maybe less of an attacking figure, but again, a player who is good at interplay, able to help transition ball forward as well. So the whole left side is built up around moving the ball into more dangerous areas, and Nico Schlotterbeck is a left-footed centre back and is involved in that ball carrying and movement down the field. And he's just brilliant at it. He's able to take the ball around players. He's able to play the ball passing as well. He likes to play big booming crossfield balls, which I think again always stands out. But despite the fact that he is a ball playing centre back, actually also very, very strong defensively as well. Has really impressive 1v1 metrics defensively as well, which I think stands out. And I think for me this season, what's really impressed has been the fact that he's come up against world-class players in players like Erling Haaland and Robert Lewandowski, and has looked comfortable against them. And I think that's the most exciting thing for me about him. I think that's the thing that's made me realise that this is the sort of guy who you can slot into a team and he'll do well. I think as well, as part of my day job, you mentioned before, I work for Analytics FC, and we have a scouting platform, and I spend a lot of time on that platform just having a play around, making sure that the sorts of players who should be standing out are standing out in the numbers. And he's someone who for the last couple of seasons has stood out defensively in the Bundesliga. Last season he was on loan at Union Berlin and put up really good numbers there as well, and he's doing the same this season. So this is a player who has played at a couple of clubs in the Bundesliga whose numbers have stood out in both cases, and on the basis of the eye test this season is just playing fantastically as well. So that's why Nico Schlotterbeck is great for me.
Nice and concise there. You kind of rounded the question off at the end. I did think when you said we live in a world where with ball playing centre backs, you were going to start going into sort of a monologue, the street style, like Scott Parker at the end of the 2019-20 season. I was prepared for that. No, I understand where you're coming from with Schlotterbeck, or with Nico Schlotterbeck, I should say, because as you mentioned, his brother Kevin spelt Keven, which doesn't sit right with me, is also at Freiburg, but as you say, doesn't play as frequently as Nico. But just looking sort of at his, I mean, I agree completely with what you're saying. He's a very good ball carrier, but also he just seems very well rounded. He's good. It seems like he's good at everything. He's kind of that centre half where you look at them and you think, man, you could really play for a top level club. It's beginning to sort of look like that with the consistency that he's doing these performances. But sort of delving into the data, as you just mentioned there, we're looking at 0.1 xg, 0.04 xa per 90 for a centre back, and that's I mean, for anybody who isn't versed in those metrics, that's quite high for a player in his position. He also has 1.29 shots per 90. Which again is quite high for a central defender. So it's, I'm talking about that consistency, and clearly he's doing something from an attacking perspective. Is there something in Freiburg's style of play which I will not have picked up on just purely from watching highlights, which inflates those numbers of Schlotterbeck's that makes him perhaps stand out in the numbers a little bit more?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think obviously those attacking numbers are sort of tempered by the fact that he is a sort of pivot for them in set piece play, and Freiburg are big on their set piece plays. They are a club who, as any smart, I think, mid-table side will be, who realise that set pieces are a really good way of generating production for your team. So
marginal gains, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So he's playing for a side who are a high volume set piece club, and he's a target for them often from corners and free kicks. So that will add to it. But yeah, he does like to get forward. And I think one of the things about Freiburg is we talked about them being a sort of solid side, and I think we to use the phrase again, we live in an age where opposition sides are trying to are much more defensively intelligent than maybe they have been in the past, and so what we're seeing is an ability for mid blocks or high pressing systems to limit opposition's transition. So you're stopping teams getting forward in quite the same way, and one of the ways that I think we're seeing modern coaches counteract that is by, rather than having to use necessarily wide players, fullbacks, wingers, or central midfielders to transition the ball, we are seeing a use of centre backs to break down opposition defensive systems. And I mean, you watch a lot of Leeds yourself, you'll have seen the impact that a ball carrying centre back can have on Leeds' man to man system. And Nico Schlotterbeck is a player who is used by Christian Streich in that sort of way. He is someone who is able to break the first line of pressure, is able to destabilise an opposition's pressing system or defensive structure, and I think that's why he's used in that way, and why he does put up such good numbers, because he is able to find space that's left by Christian Gunter pushing forward. So it's almost as though Schlotterbeck is being used as a sort of makeshift fullback at times. So Gunter will get really far forward, leave space behind him to be attacked, and Schlotterbeck will run into that space, often in the half space actually as well, not just in wide areas. He's often looking to get into the space between Niklas Höfler and Gunter and get the ball forward, and then they're able to sort of build those triangles. And I noticed, I was looking on FB Ref before, but Christian Gunter, the left back, is one of the highest shot creating action producers in the Bundesliga. He has 51 shot creating actions this season, which, to put it into perspective, Thomas Müller, who is top of that list, is on 51. So yeah, Christian Gunter with 43 shot creating actions is only just behind him. So a lot of their production is coming through Gunter, and Schlotterbeck carrying that ball forward is able to then find Gunter, who can interchange with players like I mentioned Vincenzo Grifo, but also Woo Young Jong as well, who's also a really, really good attacking facilitator. So it's smart stuff from Freiburg, and Schlotterbeck is a big part of that attacking production as well. So that's why his attacking numbers look so great.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that with Christian Gunter, so I suppose that is obviously going to assist you when you're playing pretty much in tandem with a player who's as creatively prolific as that. And I mean, just to contextualize it for people who haven't seen Freiburg this season, they typically set up with a sort of three central defenders. Your wing backs, Gunter being one of those, and as you mentioned there, the getting into the half space for Schlotterbeck isn't too difficult because you've got Gunter who can either shuffle back and cover, and the other two central defenders can shuffle across to Schlotterbeck's side and cover, so to effectively make a back four in possession whenever Schlotterbeck is in possession, or getting forward. Schlotterbeck can get into those half spaces, and Gunter can maintain that width and stretch the pitch on the left hand side. So yeah, it's it's very valuable to have obviously a central defender who can break that first line of pressure with a carry or a dribble, because that, as you were saying there, it can completely disrupt a man-to-man structure, especially, but it can disrupt the pressing sequences that other teams go through, because ultimately it asks the question, if there's a central defender coming at a right back or coming at a defensive midfielder, who takes him? Who engages the ball carrier then? Because that's something which ordinarily teams will not have legislated for, but yeah, with Schlotterbeck, I feel like as a result of that, as a result of where he's taking the ball, he then is receiving passes in areas of the pitch, from Gunter, as you mentioned, where you wouldn't ordinarily find a centre back, and that's again another indication of his comfort in possession. So I think that's another positive of him. This is a bit of a hypothetical twist on it, but I'm very much aware that a lot of people who listen to this podcast are, they live in the UK, or they follow the Premier League, or they support a Premier League team. And I think it's always, for me, sometimes when it's a player I haven't come across before, it's always, I don't want to say easier. I try and relate a player that I've seen to somebody else who I know a little bit more about. And if you were to compare Nico Schlotterbeck to a Premier League central defender, or even anybody in English football, or more mainstream football, who would it be? Who does Schlotterbeck remind you of a little bit?
I don't know if this is a cop-out answer, but I'm going to say Ben White. But
that is very controversial.
Yeah,
the Leeds supporter going for Ben White.
But I'm going to be even more controversial and say Ben White when he was playing for Leeds, rather than Ben White when he was playing for Brighton and Arsenal, which is obviously where he played in the Premier League. So I'm not sure whether or not it is a cop-out answer, but yeah, very similar stuff to the stuff that we were seeing from Ben White in the Championship in particular. That ability to carry the ball, and not only sort of carry it in the sense that you might expect ball carrying, and sort of moving it through the first line of pressure and then moving it on, but very much attacking, carrying the ball, getting a head of steam on, and just driving through opposition teams. So yeah, really, really reminiscent of Ben White, albeit on the opposite side. So maybe watching Ben White with a mirror. But yeah, I would say that there are differences between the two of them as well. I think Schlotterbeck is much better aerially than Ben White is, and he's much better 1v1 than Ben White as well. So yeah, I guess Ben White tempered with a more classic centre back, which I think is why he's so exciting, because you do get both of those sides of his game, which I think often you don't get with centre backs. I think there's the leniency to be slightly worse defensively if you are so good on the ball, but I don't think we necessarily see that so much with Nico Schlotterbeck. I think I don't want to paint Schlotterbeck as being some kind of god amongst centre backs. There are weaknesses to his game. He can be found out at times, but it's very rare, and he just is an exciting centre back to watch.
Cats or dogs, that's the argument that I'm hearing here. Yeah. And I know how much you hate that term, that expression. But yeah, I do think it's important that you make the discernment of Ben White at Leeds as opposed to Ben White at Arsenal, because the brief is different. All we need to do to understand that on a base level is look at the pressing numbers that obviously that Leeds put out, or they did put out in the Championship, and the numbers that Arsenal do currently. It is a different brief altogether, but you do still retain some of those ball carrying qualities, as you say. I mean, how transferable are these? I mean, I know the answer to this question, but how transferable are these skills to another team, to another setup? Because obviously we've seen we've seen this season how he's essentially two sides of the same coin when it comes to central defensive play. You know, how can we stop Bayern from luring them to their lair essentially? Because it sounds like, as I mean, you've inflated him in my mind now. You know, you've basically told me that he is a centre back, a god amongst men. How can we stop Bayern Munich from getting him to stand at Sassenerstrasse and holding up the shirt?
Yeah, buying Munich, right?
Oh no, that's it. One appearance only on this podcast. That's it.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of things that go in Schlotterbeck's favour. He's left-footed, which I think is big. Obviously, there are great centre backs around, ball carrying centre backs who are right-footed, but once you're left-footed, you're a commodity that is pretty rare in terms of top level football. So he will stand out against some of his peers just by dint of the fact that he is left-footed. I think the other thing as well is that if you look through the history of Freiburg's player development, they sell players on cheaply. So he's going to be available for much less than he will be worth when he goes somewhere else. And I think there's going to be. I would be surprised if he doesn't move on this summer. And yeah, I guess I would be surprised if it isn't Bayern Munich who end up pitching in for him. I think his skills set is transferable. As I've already mentioned, like the thing for me is not just that he's doing great things in the Bundesliga, which I know a lot of people can be fairly disparaging of the Bundesliga for various reasons, but there are elite players in the Bundesliga who, as I've mentioned, Schlotterbeck has come up against, and he's performed really well against them. His athleticism, I think, stands him in good stead in that regard. He's a player who does like to get close to his marking responsibility, because I think he realizes that he can sort of tweak for any mistakes that he might make by his athleticism as well. He does have a tendency to give away fouls, but I think, again, we live in the age of the tactical foul, so I don't think that will be looked on too unkindly. But he's just a player who can step up to his man, get really close. He's good aerially. As I've said, he's able to backtrack. He's able to backwards defend, as I like to call it, because of his athleticism as well. Really positionally smart. So particularly against Haaland, I noted that he just seems to have a knack of reading where the play is going to go and being able to get to the ball ahead of Haaland, who is probably the most athletic player in world football. So I think it's just a matter of time before he ends up somewhere playing Champions League football, to be honest with you. And maybe as a Freiburg fan, that's a bad thing to say, but I think part of being a Freiburg supporter is that you know that they will develop players, and you will see those players playing at other and better teams. So that there's an extent to which I'm kind of excited to see how his future unfolds in that respect.
Just wait until the Bayern strength and conditioning coaches and nutritionists get him on the Goretzka diet, because that's going to be a sight to behold then, isn't it? But yeah, coming to a Champions League near you, I think, is essentially the message that we've conveyed there. But it's interesting what you say at the end about being a Freiburg fan and accepting that these players are ultimately going to move on and are going to be sold. What is the pathway? I mean, we know what the pathway is like from Schlotterbeck, but what is historically? Who are some of the alumni that have come through at Freiburg? And I'm not just talking about Papi Cisse, although I would like to dedicate an entire podcast episode to his 11-goal stint for Newcastle in 2011-12. But we'll get away from that before I find myself down a rabbit hole. What has it been like for under 23 players, using Freiburg as a platform to bigger things, but not necessarily always better things?
Yeah, I've sent you a big list of a lot of the players that have come through the system, and I was surprised going through the last few decades of Freiburg history just to see how many of them there are, and they tend to follow pathway streams. So Freiburg, I think, are most famous really for developing goalkeepers. They have a goalkeeping coach in Andreas Kronenberg, who is recently moved to the German national team as a goalkeeping coach, which I think is an indicator of how good he's been. But they've got a whole tranche of good goalkeeping coaches throughout their system. And so players like Oliver Baumann, Roman Burki, Alexander Schwolov, Hertha Berlin at the moment. Zach Steffen is a name that many people will know. He was at Freiburg for a bit. Rafael Gikiewicz as well. So a good tradition of goalkeepers coming through the system, and good news for Schlotterbeck, a good history of centre backs development as well. Although I suppose some of the names on the list may raise some questions, but Omar Toprak, Matthias Ginter, Mark Oliver Kempf at Stuttgart. Chola Shionshu, who's a player that will be familiar to Premier League watchers, as well as Robin Koch, and then Pascal Stenzel as well. And then beyond that, there's more, I guess, attacking players, players like Daniel Caligiuri, Max Kruse, Max Phillip, Ryan Kent, who people will have seen linked with Leeds but playing at Rangers, Luca Waldschmidt, who spent some time in Portugal as well, and the wonderfully named Florian Niederlechner as well has gone through Freiburg as well. And then I guess that just players that they've got currently who are quite exciting as well. So players like Roland Shaloi, although he's dropped off a little bit recently. Wu Yongjong, who's one of my favourites. I wrote a scouting report for your Patreon that scouted on him. He's a player that I love to watch because he's just a little bit out of the box. But they've also got players like Philipp Lienhardt, who they got through the Real Madrid youth system as well. Yannick Haber, who was quite exciting for a while or was considered quite exciting for a while in German youth football, but hasn't really kicked on as much. But even players like Niklas Höfler, who I mentioned, who's very much a one-club man, but they developed him through the youth system, and he's gone on to be just a really solid Bundesliga player as well. And then I've just noted down some of the current players that they have who are coming through the system. So players like Yannick Keitel, Kevin Schade, both of whom, as well as Noah Atapolo, I think, who is also a goalkeeper, they've all been involved in the Germany youth setup in this window. And another player, Noah Weishaupt, who's an exciting sort of all-round player, so can play left back, left wing, plays central midfield, sometimes plays as a forward player as well at times. So these youngsters are coming through. The Freiburg have a two teams, so Freiburg 2 play in the Dritte Liga, so the third division of German football, and they sort of float between promotion into that league and then relegation into the Regionalliga, so the more local leagues. And I think the fact that they have a two team where they have a couple of older players helping out is just a really good way of blooding talent. So you get these youngsters playing in senior football from a very early age as well, which is obviously good. And Christian Streich is just happy to use these players in games. So Kevin Schade, I think, particularly, is a player who's quite exciting to watch. He's been very exciting to watch for the under-21s team in Germany, because I think in Freiburg he's expected to do a lot of backtracking and man marking, but he's just a really, really explosive runner off and on the ball. And when he plays for the under-21s, he gets scope to do that. So it's been quite fun watching him play for Germany under-21s this season as well. But definitely a tradition I've just listed off a huge amount of names there, but I think that only goes towards explaining just how much development is being done by Freiburg. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that these players expect to have that pathway into a higher level if they perform well. And so there's that sort of understanding between young players in the club, that if you perform, you will be able to make that step up. We won't stop you from moving. We won't charge exorbitant fees for you. And there is very much a pathway there, which I think, as you'll know, working with the scouted guys, you'll know that is a really important aspect to player development. If players can't develop at, say, Chelsea, then they will move to Leeds United, where they feel as though that pathway is there. So I think for Freiburg, that's very much there. There is that pathway through, and there's not going to be anything sort of holding you back in that respect. So the result of that is that they have this huge litany of players who've gone through their system.
No, I think that's great. I mean, it's an exhaustive list, as you mentioned, but I think it's right to draw attention to it, because there are quite a lot of names. I mean, you will recognise them all pretty much if you follow German football regularly. But even if you kind of just have a passing interest, you will recognise quite a lot of those names. And it's interesting to see where some of those players have ended up. In terms of you saying that Freiburg, these young players know that Freiburg aren't going to command exorbitant fees. I think from the top of my head, the Robin Koch deal, the Çağlar Söyüncü deal, to come to the Premier League where you can command higher fees. They didn't exactly break the bank, and these were players who were playing regularly for the first team, and just so happened to be centre halves, just like Nico Schlotterbeck. But even just the other ones like Ryan Kent, it's interesting to see the spread. And one of the things that I wanted to get into just a little bit just before we finish is this something to do with the geography of Freiburg? We've said it's near the Black Forest. It's tucked away in sort of the southwest corner of Germany. Is it something to do with the geography that means it's Freiburg are they know they have to be good when it comes to youth recruitment. They know they have to be very good when it comes to player development because I don't know. That's kind of the question for you. Is that is that something where they know they have to be quite adept at?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something in the geography and I think also maybe in the historical particularities of the way that Freiburg has ended up in the Bundesliga. So they have had those stints out of the Bundesliga in the Zweite Bundesliga. And I think as a result of that, they've just always been one of those clubs who are a fairly good stepping stone club for the area. So geographically, it's tucked away right at the south west corner of Germany, and it's at the juncture of France and Switzerland as well. And one of the things that I've noted is that there's been a stream of players who've come from France and ended up in Freiburg. So you've clearly got that market available to you. It's not too far from Strasbourg, for example. So you have that sort of maybe, and maybe Freiburg itself, it feels as though it's sort of a place between places. It doesn't feel, when I've been there, like high Germany. It doesn't feel like the sorts of places that you associate necessarily with Germany. It is very close to a sort of a wine growing region in France, for example. When you fly to Freiburg, you fly to Basel Mulhouse airport, so you're not even flying into Germany. So it's very much a sort of geographically interesting location in that sense. It's also remote. You've got Stuttgart nearby, and you've got Augsburg nearby as well. And I noticed, so for example, Nico Schlotterbeck, who we've been talking about, grew up in a suburb of Stuttgart. But again, the historical peculiarities of German football, I guess when the Schlotterbecks were coming through, Freiburg were technically a bigger club than Stuttgart, at least in terms of their positioning in the German hierarchy. So and obviously Augsburg have been a club who have sort of been, struggling with relegation for a few seasons as well. I wonder how much that just means that because of the smart development of an academy at Freiburg, they've managed to pick up a lot of youth players who are the brightest and the best of that region. I definitely think there's something in that, and yeah, when you look at a lot of the players going through, they do just pick up a huge amount of youngsters from the surrounding areas. And yeah, if you actually even drill right down and look at the clubs that are around, even some of the Regionalliga teams, some of the smaller, lower level local teams, there's just not really any clubs around there. So I think that as a result of all of this, they managed to have a fairly big catchment area, and they've been, I guess, positioned quite well in recent German football history to be able to command some of the better players, even from some of the now Bundesliga clubs that are nearby as well. So I think everything has played into their hands, and with all of that laid on top of the fact that they have such a smart academy system, they're really well placed in that respect.
So that was a brief rundown of SC Freiburg in the Bundesliga, currently sitting in third place with players such as Nico Schlotterbeck, who we've discussed at length on this podcast. I'd just like to say thank you to John for joining me on this one. John, where can people find you if they would like to discuss Hegel or football or chess or Analytics FC or Leeds United or Ben White regens in the Bundesliga?
Yeah, the best place to get me is Twitter, as always. So I'm at John_Mackenzie, and John has no H, and Mackenzie has an A between the M and the C.
Great stuff. Well, this has been the Scouted Football Podcast with me, Joe Donoghue. Thank you very much for tuning in. Take care, stay safe, and bye for now. For player profiles, in-depth features, and exclusive interviews, visit sfhandbook.com to learn more about the best young football players in the world.